Howdy, my name is Cassie Tucker, and for my video presentation for Philosophy 332, I decided to take a more artistic, approach because Professor Conway did tell us to be creative with our final project. I wanted to take you on this creative journey to what I think is the most fascinating and thought-provoking stories from Plato's Republic, which is the myth of found towards the end of the book. In this video, I wanted to take a different approach to exploring this philosophical tale, philosophical myth, instead of just analyzing the text. I wanted to be a little bit more creative with it. I wanted to be a little bit more visual in my interpretation of the myth, so I decided to bring it to life visually through art. So I used a canvas, a very long canvas, to portray 3 different panels of the myth of and I used acrylic paint to bring that vision to life. So over the next several minutes, you'll see 3 separate portions of time lapses that go over the 3 different panels that I used to express my interpretation. And you'll see within those time lapses the key moments of the myth, which I portrayed in those 3 panels, which is the moment of death and his extraordinary experience in the afterlife, which is the most vibrant panel on the painting, and finally his return to the world of the living to share what he had seen. The myth of comes at the very end of the Republic, and Plato uses it to address some of the biggest questions about justice, the soul, and what might await us after death. It's a story that challenges us to think about morality, not just in terms of earthly rewards, but in terms of eternal consequences, because those are just as important as the earthly rewards that we experience. What struck me most about this myth is how it blends philosophical concepts with vivid, almost cinematic imagery, hence why I chose to paint it. That's what inspired me to turn it into this visual project, because these 3 scenes feel powerful, not just intellectually, but emotionally and symbolically as well. As I talk through each part of the myth, I will share my interpretations of the scenes and how I chose to represent them artistically, as well as give a overview towards the end of each of the 3 time lapses. This is not just a retelling, it is a visual mediation of Plato's ideas. So I hope you'll find something to reflect on as you watch my interpretation of the myth, whether you already had a certain idea of how this myth looked like to you, or after you see this, maybe you will think about this myth in the afterlife just a little bit differently. So for this first portion of the painting, the first panel, which symbolizes death, as you can see, is on the bottom in full dress because he was a warrior in battle with his shield and his spear, as very popular and highly used back during his time. This entire panel is more of a gloomy, dark feel to it because there is a lot of death, as you can see in the background. His comrades, those picking up his the other soldiers' dead bodies, it's just a very sad moment in the myth, but it is the initial starting point of the myth. So as you can see, is fully intact and he is clutching his chest, which later I will be painting blood running from that point and where he's clutching his chest, just to symbolize his death overall. However, he is very healthy looking. He isn't decomposed at all. He isn't portrayed as looking nothing but alive. So that is what I chose to portray here. His comrades had not yet found him yet in this painting. However, they were said in the myth to think that it was quite odd that he was not decomposed at all. He was still, it looked like he was still alive. And throughout the rest of this portion of the painting in this panel, the ground and really just everything looks dead, just to portray that holistic view of death in this first panel, and that will come into play within the third panel when he is returned to Earth. But it really just, I wanted it to all symbolize his death. The plants, no plants are alive, they're all dead and just not thriving, how those within this panel are not thriving. So please enjoy the rest of this first part of the time lapse, and yeah, thank you. So as you have just seen through the first panel, the first time lapse of the first panel, those were my interpretations and why I chose to paint that scene the way I did. And just to give an overview and a holistic view of the painting, and I'll be doing this after each panel is done and after I'm done explaining each interpretation of each panel. So the first painting in this series captures the very beginning of Ur's journey, his death on the battlefield. Now, it's important to note that Ur's story begins where most end, which is death. Ur is a soldier who falls in battle, and his body is left untouched for 10 days. When his companions return to collect and burn the bodies, when his companions return to, I don't know if you can see, they're collecting bodies. When they return to do this, they discover something shocking, that Ur's body had not decomposed. It was still the same as it would be if he were alive or had just died. They bring him back to prepare him for burial, but suddenly he comes back to life, not just revived but transformed, carrying with him a message from beyond. In this panel, I focused on a moment of both stillness and transition. Ur lying on the ground, surrounded by fallen soldiers, with almost a surreal stillness in his body. The sky is darkened, heavy with the weight of the battle, but there's also a subtle glow beginning to form around himself and Ur's body. That glow hints at the divine or metaphysical journey that's about to begin. Death in this image is not final, it's only a doorway to reach this part of the afterlife. What I found moving about this part of the myth is that Plato doesn't treat death as an end or even something that's tragic. Instead, it becomes an opportunity to learn the truth that the living desperately need to hear. Ur becomes a messenger, almost like a prophet or a medium in a sense, sent back with insight into this ultimate question of human existence and what lies beyond this lifetime. And there's something almost symbolic here about war and the kind of lives we lead. Ur dies in battle, and the most chaotic and violent human experiences, and yet from that chaos emerges clarity. I try to show that paradox in the comparison, the grim battlefield as a backdrop to an awakening. It's a powerful metaphor for transformation, that even in destruction, there can be meaning, revelation, and even rebirth. This scene sets the tone for the rest of the myth, and for the rest of my artwork as well. It's about crossing a threshold, so this being the threshold that he comes from and exits. And it's the beginning of a soul's journey in the limits of the physical world towards something that is eternal. So this is, we're moving on to the second portion of the painting, the second panel, the second major moment within the myth of Ur, when Ur ascends into the afterlife, where he is met with these circles that are on a spindle or on an axis, being held by one of the goddesses. And he is taking this all in. He is noticing the portals on the top and the bottom, the two portals on the top leading to heaven, and the two on the bottom leading back down to earth. I wanted to make this portion of the panel this portion of the painting very colorful and very vibrant, because, no one knows what the afterlife looks like, but I just wanted it to make it the most outstanding part of this painting, because it is the main contributor to why this myth is even a myth, to discuss the afterlife. And as you can see underneath the orange vibrant colors that I had put to make the circle stand out is the running river that those are sent into once they have made their choice to either go back down to earth or back up to heaven. And that is Ur beneath that river, the tiny little person taking it all in, just on his knees in awe of what he is seeing, the river, the circles, the portals, the colors, everything. And once we move on into the third panel, which is when he descends back to earth and back to his normal body, this whole bright portion of the afterlife, or the middle panel, is going to be represented in how Ur looks when he's back on Earth, when he is holding that bright light in his hand, just to symbolize what he is trying to discuss, what he is trying to say about the afterlife. So I hope you enjoy the many colors and the way that I chose to interpret the spinning circles on the axis, and how is taking in this very strange yet very symbolic portion of his life. Okay, so now for the second panel, the middle panel, the one that's the most vibrant, the most eye-catching, the afterlife portion of the panel. In the second panel, we follow soul leading from his death and its journey beyond the boundaries of an earthly life. After his death, his soul travels with others to a mysterious place with 4 openings, 2 leading to the heavens and 2 leading to below into the earth. Souls who lived virtuously ascend into the 2 portals of the heavens, and while the others descend to face consequences for their earthly misdeeds down back to the earthly tunnels, I guess, or openings. Here, Plato paints a vision of justice on a cosmic scale. So how you are on Earth very much affects how you will live in the afterlife, or where you will go in the afterlife, whether that is upwards towards heaven or back down towards heaven or towards Earth. The universe becomes a vast, orderly system where the soul's choices ripple into eternity. I try to represent this celestial harmony in my painting with concentric glowing spheres, a nod to the spindle of necessity that describes, as is right here. This device, held by the goddess, I didn't paint the goddess, but it is held by the goddess Ananke. Still not entirely sure how to pronounce her name, but this device is supposed to be held by her, in the axle upon which all reality turns, powered by the songs of the sirens and guided by the fates. The souls eventually reach a meadow where they rest before choosing their next lives. What struck me most about this part of how the myth makes personal responsibility cosmic. Souls choose new lives, some wisely, others foolishly, and it's through this cycle that Plato explains reincarnation and the whole role of reason in shaping our destiny. Through this imagery, I wanted to capture both the beauty and the gravity of the heavens, and how our choices even now shape how we become later. For Plato, philosophy isn't just about ideas, it's about preparing the soul for choices like these, whether we are performing justly on Earth, performing justly in the afterlife, or returning back from the afterlife in order to spare others the misfortune of not being just and going back to the 2 openings of Earth to be punished for our misdeeds. So I apologize for the third panel in this third part of the time lapse being a little bit out of frame. The canvas was very long, but I tried to get in most of it as I could. You can see it on the very edge. However, I will explain what is being painted, and you will be able to see it in my overall holistic view that I show in between each part of the time lapses. So is sent back down to Earth from his moments in the afterlife, and he is holding this bright white light that he takes with him, in my interpretation, obviously this isn't in the myth, but takes with him back down to Earth to just show and symbolize what he had seen. These, as you can mainly see in this part of the time lapse, it'll get a little bit better as we move on, hopefully, with this time lapse. But is shown trying to share his story of what he had seen with two people walking on the path that he is walking on, and I wanted to portray those people as being Socrates and Plato. Obviously, you know, myth isn't speaking to them directly when he is coming back from the afterlife, but I just wanted to incorporate them into the painting because they are the main contributors of this myth and how we know it to be today. And I wanted to portray Socrates explaining to Plato what this myth is about, so that's why he, as you can see on the very end of the painting, he is pointing upwards to the bright shining light, which I also not only wanted to portray as the afterlife, or where had just come from, with everything being bright now and not gloomy as it was in the first panel, but also as that symbol of justice that Socrates had mentioned before in the previous books in Plato's Republic, about how the sun or the light is like is how knowledge is dispersed to those around the philosopher king, because he is the bright light that shows everyone what justice is and what true knowledge really is. And in this panel, as how everything in the first panel, as I had mentioned, this would come into play in the third panel, everything in the first panel was very gloomy and dark, and it was just filled with death. This panel is filled with life and light, and the plants are blooming, and there's greenery that's starting to show through, and that is mainly just how I wanted to portray this panel, as an evolution of how death to the afterlife, back to life, can be something beautiful, not only a process that had to go through just to show people how to live correctly, but that it can be a beautiful thing. Death doesn't have to be scary, in this interpretation at least, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this time lapse, and thank you for listening to me and my interpretations throughout my 3 panels of this painting. So this final portion of the panel represents Ur's return to the world of the living, a moment that is quiet, mysterious, and deeply symbolic, yet vibrant, and kind of shows a symbol of rebirth. It's not just a physical return, but a spiritual and philosophical one. He's no longer just a soldier or a man who died on the battlefield. Now he's a messenger, always trying to relay what he had seen to these two people, Socrates and Plato, in my interpretation, just to add them into the painting. But a witness to the unseen mechanics of the universe. He comes back not with answers, but with insight. So he's not trying to tell them what is exactly right, but mainly just how to not avoid going through those openings. This panel was really interesting to create because it's the least dramatic in terms of action, like this one, but it's the most powerful in terms of meaning. So we go through all 3 panels to find this meaning. I wanted to show the contrast between what he had experienced and the world that he comes back to, a world that continues unaware of the vast moral universe that lies beyond the veil of this life. You might notice that I've used lighter tones and softer edges, and perhaps a slightly blurring between the horizon and the sky. This is meant to reflect the dreamlike nature of his return. He's walking back into reality that hasn't changed, but he's the one that has changed. Philosophically, this is Plato's way of offering hope. Ur's return is proof that even if we don't see the cosmic consequences of our actions, they still do very much exist. And even more importantly, we possess the freedom to choose right from wrong, and to hopefully choose the right from the wrong. That's what the myth of boils down to. It's a story about justice, yes, but also about personal responsibility. It's not fate that dooms us, it's our own decisions, and because of that, we always have the power to live differently, to change, and to, most importantly, grow. So there's also something very human in this final part. Doesn't come back or become a prophet or a god. He simply just shares what he had seen as a human and coming back into his human form. That's all he can do, and maybe all any of us can really do. We live, we reflect, and we return from our own symbolic journeys and tell stories. So that's what Plato did with this myth in my eyes, and that's what I've tried to recreate in this painting. This return to Earth that isn't necessarily a conclusion, but a beginning to what everyone's interpretation of the afterlife and justice and all of the inner workings of that, what those truly mean. It's a call to the reader, the viewer, and the listener. How will you live now, knowing what you know, and what kind of life will you choose from knowing those things? So that concludes my video presentation, as well as the visual component of how I chose to interpret the myth of through paint, acrylic paint and canvas. And I just wanted to say that it brings us through this visual journey of the myth of from the moment of his death through the awe-inspiring expanse of the afterlife, and finally back to the world of the living. As I reflect on the myth and these paintings, I'm struck by how timeless Plato's message really is. On the surface, this is a story about the soul after death, but at its core, it's a reminder about how we live before death and how we might want to act, thinking about how we act here will affect us in our afterlife and affect us, our life beyond this one that we are currently in. Our daily choices, and even the small ones, shape not only our lives, but potentially something far beyond them. Earth's story isn't just about fate or justice in some otherworldly realm. It's also a philosophical mirror held up to our own lives, our own priorities, and our own sense of purpose. By painting these scenes, I wanted to bring the story into a new medium, something visual, something emotional, something eye-catching, something that you might enjoy watching me, do. Painting allowed me to slow down and sit with each moment in the myth and truly see how I wanted to go about it, how I wanted to draw it, the colors I wanted to use, and overall just how I wanted to interpret it to those watching this video. And to just really deeply think about what each part meant and how I personally interpret the ideas behind each of them. I hope that in watching this, maybe you are also able to pause and think about the bigger picture, about the cycles of life and death, about free will, about responsibility, and about what it means to live well, or if living well means living justly, then that as well. In the end, returns not just as a survivor, but as a witness, a soul who's seen the true cost and value of human decisions and the consequences and rewards behind those decisions. He doesn't come back with threats or promises of reward, but with a powerful invitation to choose wisely overall. That's what Plato leaves us with, this compelling idea that each of us has the power to shape our destiny, not just in some mythical afterlife, but here and now in what we are doing in this very present moment. So thank you very much for watching and spending this time with me. And I hope you connected with not just the philosophical component, but with the art as well, or, both of them would be great. And I hope that this sparked some new feelings of your own, and maybe it helped you interpret the entire myth in a different lens. And thank you once again for watching.